You've got people in the streets here. This president has not brought this nation together. As he says, he's working for his base. Well, there are a majority of people that are outside of that base. And I think, you know, my best advice has been, and I was able to say this to him directly, please, Mr. President, you have to bring this country together.
California Senator Dianne Feinstein earlier today on the Sunday shows. And what you heard there is that she's referencing what you've been seeing over the past 3 weekends, the first 3 weekends of this new president. Protests, and many of them across the country and around the world, to rally against President Trump. Just this weekend, there have been demonstrations in Washington, New York, Los Angeles, Houston, London, and elsewhere. And the dissent against this White House does not seem to be dying down, at least not yet. And we're asking you, agree or disagree, President Trump will ultimately respond to public pressure and rescind the immigration ban. Go to pulse.msnbc.com/America. I'll be sharing those results with you very, very soon. But first, I want to bring in MSNBC contributor and New York Times national reporter Yamiche Alcindor, Gian-Carlo Peressutti, former spokesman for President George H.W. Bush, and Mike Morey, former communications director to Senator Chuck Schumer. All three of you have been seeing a lot of activity based on the spaces you're involved in. I'll start with you, Mike, on this. Every location, every weekend, are we going to see protests?
I think you are. I think what you're seeing here is and we were chatting about this a little bit earlier, I think you're seeing a corollary to what happened in 2010, which is a level of activism that is primarily encouraged by the fact that the president hasn't really done anything since he was inaugurated in order to bring the two sides together. Historically, after an election, a president, regardless of who wins or who loses, realizes I'm the president of the whole country, and so therefore I should do things to bring us together. This president has done just the opposite of that. I think you're seeing a level of engagement that the Democratic Party and the left has not seen in quite some time, and I think it's a harbinger of things to come. If you're watching right now, you've got congressmen who are running out of back doors at town halls because they're afraid to interact with their constituents. You had a congressman who was escorted by police because he didn't want to interact with a rally that was sort of screaming at him and shouting at him. I think we are seeing a level of activism that is a long time coming, and I think it's going to benefit the Democratic Party.
Yamiche, we've got a president who does like to be liked, and he does not want this to be known as the presidency of protests. Does this get under the skin for him?
I think it's getting a bit under his skin, only because we've seen in tweets that he's talked about these protests, the fact that he's acknowledging that there are people out in the streets, even though he's claimed in some tweets that they were paid, or he's called them thugs, or he's called them anarchists. I think the idea is that he's paying attention to these people, and he recognizes that there are thousands, if not millions, of people around the world by now who have voiced their opinion very loudly that they are not in support of him. I think what he is, of course, encouraged by is the fact that there are a couple of pro-Trump protests, and that in some ways might make him feel like, you know, I'm keeping the promises to my constituents, which is what he's doing. You know, this idea of the ban, this idea of building the wall, he is keeping his promises. But I think that in some ways, and I've talked to a lot of protesters, progressive protesters, who feel that that's making people come together because they feel as though all of the things that he said on the campaign trail are going to come to fruition. Yeah, and you should bring up a good point, because we have pro-Trump marches right now, for instance, right here in New York City today. Gian-Carlo, when you look at this, might this be the rallying call, right? To bring together his supporters, number one, number two, bring together the Republican Party, because there's so many progressives, as has been said, in the streets so far.
Well, I think we've certainly seen a lot of sound and fury. I think in terms of what it signifies, that's still an open question. You know, I ask myself, how many of those protesters were Donald Trump supporters or even neutral to Donald Trump during the election? And I think the answer to that is not many. So I might disagree with Mike a little bit and say I think we have a long way to go before we see this engagement really start to translate into organization and true activity that could make a difference. Namely, defeat some incumbents in the 2018 midterms, all toward gearing up toward defeating our current president in the 2020 presidential cycle. When we had the Tea Party in 2010, you saw business people, funeral parlor owners, car dealers leaving their businesses to run for Congress because they were organized and they were mobilized to do something. coming. And I don't believe we're there yet with regard to a lot of the activity that we're seeing.
Dianne Feinstein, you heard what she was suggesting, Gian-Carlo. Bring the country together. Why doesn't he do that? Why doesn't he address what has been happening for his first 3 weekends as the President of the United States?
Because it's not part of his political persona. He never claimed to be, well, and we would like to see that. I would like to see that as a proud member of the Republican establishment, such as it is these days. But that's not who Donald Trump is. I don't think he's interested necessarily in healing the country. He's interested in winning and getting his agenda through and getting his way. And
you know, Yamiche, and it's spreading because we're also seeing this with other members of the Republican Party. They're not only potentially protesting in front of Gian-Carlo's house, but they're also protesting, for instance, with Speaker Ryan. He has to face these very same voices. Do we see this then branching out to other leaders of the Republican Party just because they are supporting, some strongly, some not so strongly, Donald Trump?
This is definitely branching out. I was just on the phone last week with a young man based in D.C. who has set up a spreadsheet listing both Democrats and Republicans and all the town halls and places, public places that they're going to be in a way to encourage protesters to show up and to let people know that they can have these face-to-face confrontations. So I should say that protesters, and I mean progressive protesters, they're of course targeting Republicans and really making lists of where they're going to be and passing it around, but they're also targeting Democrats. The idea is that there were thousands of people outside of Chuck Schumer's home, making sure that he knows that that his constituents want him to vote no on those nominees. So it's really even Democrats. They're telling them, hey, don't make these deals. And I should say, I've talked to at least a couple of protesters who said, hey, I used to be focused on protesting and other things, and now I'm focused on making sure that we have people to run in 2018. So we have already seen that pivot of people saying, we're not going to just be protesting, we're going to actually be running candidates.
All right, I owe you one here, Mike. We got to go. Yamiche, thank you so much. Gian-Carlo Peressutti, Mike Morey. Appreciate all three of you on a topic that I think we'll have an opportunity to discuss again. All righty. For our first Pulse question today, we've been